네, 안녕하세요. 지금부터 제13회 서울 미디어시티 비엔날레의 두 번째 사전 프로그램인 강령을 위한 노트를 시작하겠습니다. 저는 서울시립미술관 학예연구부장 정소라입니다. 반갑습니다. 지금부터 오후 6시까지 이어지는 오늘 이 자리는 지난 10월에 선임됐죠. 제13회 서울 미디어시티 비엔날레 예술감독팀인 안톤 비도클 그리고 루카스 브라시스키스, 할리 에어스가 내년 8월에 개최될 제13회 비엔날레의 주제 그리고 그에 관한 개념과 생각을 나누는 시간입니다. 총 3부로 구성된 프로그램은 예술감독팀의 발표와 발표 주제에 상응하는 영상작품 상영으로 이루어져 있습니다. 프로그램 시작에 앞서 제13회 비엔날레 예술감독팀을 소개해드리겠습니다. 먼저 안톤 비도클은 작가이자 영화감독이며 잘 알려진 예술 컨텐츠 생산과 유통의 플랫폼인 이플럭스의 창립자이기도 합니다. 한국에서는 2019년 국립현대미술관에서의 개인전 모두를 위한 불멸을 통해 여러 관객들에게 잘 알려진 바 있습니다. 죽음 예술, 영성이라는 제목의 오늘 발표는 신비주의 전통과 그 영성적인 실천이 어떻게 예술로 연결되고 새로운 상상력으로 나아갈 수 있는지를 살펴보는 그런 시간입니다. 루카스 브라시스키스는 아티스트 필름과 실험 영화를 연구하는 필름 큐레이터입니다. 루카스는 그동안 정신적이고 시네마적이며 정신분석학적인 매개로서의 무빙 이미지를 연구하는 여러 기획과 저술 활동을 펼쳐왔습니다. 오늘 발표는 부재에 관한 비평적 개념으로서의 강령을 살펴볼 예정입니다. 마지막으로 할리 에어스는 영적 믿음의 바탕을 둔 선주민 커뮤니티의 가치관 그리고 비서구권 권역에서의 지식 생산 체계에 관한 접근을 탐구하는 기획자입니다. 오늘 발표는 동시대 기술과 신비주의 전통이 어떻게 서로 영향을 주고받는지를 살펴보고 여러 이분법적인 개념들 간의 상호 연결성을 전제로 하는 영혼의 기술을 제안합니다.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you very much for the introduction. Oops. Yes, so this is the first event we're doing towards the next Media City Biennial. It's a really exciting and slightly scary undertaking, and we're very much at the beginning of it. We are just starting our research. So today what we wanted to do is to give you some broader conceptual sort of horizon of what we are thinking about, what we're researching, what we're trying to figure out. It's not really yet specific to the actual exhibition that will take place here, but maybe has more to do with certain philosophical, theoretical ramifications of ideas that we're interested in. My talk will be about 30 minutes, and then it will be followed by a screening of three somewhat short films and video works. Then we'll take a short break, and Lucas Brasiskis will continue with his presentation and so forth. What I wanted to say maybe just before I start is, this is kind of a very exciting project and idea for me. It's something that I've been thinking about really since college. I think it was in 1990s, and for this particular course, I had to do like a paper that had to do with a spiritual paradigm in modernism. Yeah, and I actually, since that time, I got completely fascinated with the idea that there is this relationship between mysticism, spiritual practices, and abstract art. It's an area that has not been very much researched, and even though it has such incredible importance for development of modern and contemporary art, there has never been too many exhibitions that really kind of try to map the history of this relationship or analyze it in depth. So as much as we're doing a contemporary biennial, a biennial of contemporary art, we're also kind of trying to think a little bit of a history of this relationship between art, spirituality, mysticism, occult, but this history is enormous because it starts with the very beginning of history, or maybe even before the beginning of written history, since the very beginning of sort of humanity and its aesthetical practices. So it's a gigantic area to cover. Yeah, so let me start. So my talk is called Death, Art, and Spirituality. So the centrality of death, along with attempts at communication with the dead and the desire for immortality, have been central topics for art and spirituality since prehistory. One can probably make an argument that images and objects that we now understand as works of art largely derive from a certain commemorative, funerary impulse, an attempt to hold in memory that which is passing. Interestingly, this impulse is not unique to modern humans. Neanderthals are thought to have decorated burial sites with flowers. Chimpanzees and elephants are known to arrange leaves and branches over fallen members of their family groups. Nikolai Fyodorov, a philosopher working in Russia at the end of 19th century, speculated that music, singing, and dance developed from burial chants and laments, as have various genres of visual art. The concept of the image derives from the Latin term imago. Masks of the dead in ancient Rome used to denote the ancestral likeness and exhibited in public parts of nobles' dwelling. Going back even further, excavation at some of the earliest human settlements, such as the Neolithic city of Katayahuk in southeast Turkey and Jericho in Palestine, yielded fascinating findings. Human skulls covered in white plaster and sometimes painted, with seashells embedded in eye sockets. Both scary and beautiful, these artifacts were usually kept under the floor of living spaces, indicating a desire to hold dead family members nearby. If true religion is a cult of ancestors, as Fyodorov observed, perhaps visual art is an important component of such a cult. I have recently worked on a film based on the oldest literary work known to date, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Composed sometime in the 3rd millennium BC in Mesopotamia, the epic describes the quest of the king of Uruk, one of the oldest and earliest large-scale metropolitan centers that we know about. Confronted with the death of his closest companion, Enkidu, Gilgamesh is overwhelmed by grief and horrified by the inevitability of his own death. And so he embarks on an epic journey to find immortality. Throughout his journey, Gilgamesh encounters multiple characters, humans, demigods, and demons, who all tell him in various ways that he should give up his quest. Undeterred, Gilgamesh eventually encounters Utnapishtim, the sole human granted immortality by the gods for saving humanity from the Great Flood, like the biblical Noah. Utnapishtim reiterates that in this world there is no permanence since the days of old. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, and while he does not find a way to physically escape death, we retain the memory of him through a literary work, through art. In his famous 1920 essay, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Sigmund Freud makes a controversial statement that the aim of all life is death. Surprisingly, the basis for the statement is biological rather than psychological. He speculates that since all organic life has evolved from inorganic matter, we want to return to our origin, to the inanimate, dead state. He goes on to suggest that this drive permeates all other drives, such as the pleasure and the reality principles, and that essentially under all these instincts is the desire for death. This opinion put Freud in opposition to most scientific consensus, where, for example, Darwin's theory of evolution is that all organisms are trying to live, to survive. Freud's proposal does ring true in the sense of, in the context of art and spirituality. I would venture that most of these practices, including mysticism and the occult, are rooted in the phenomenon of death and the hope for immortality in some form. Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophical doctrine of the will, the source of ever-present sorrow in the world, is in some way similar to Freud's death drive. Interestingly, he locates the only escape from the tyranny of the will in art, in aesthetic experience and contemplation. Aesthetic pleasure in the beautiful consists to a large extent in the fact that when we enter the state of pure contemplation, we're raised for the moment above all willing, above all desires and cares. We are, so to speak, rid of ourselves. However, isn't to be rid of ourselves, in a sense similar to dying? This idea, extremely popular with numerous artists, sounds very reminiscent of the central tenets of certain Eastern religions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism. According to traditional stories of the life of the Buddha, he first decided to leave his home and seek enlightenment after encountering the four sights: a sick person, an old person, a corpse, and a world renouncer. The first three show the sufferings to which ordinary people are subject, and the last indicates that one can overcome them through meditation and spiritual practice. Thus, the greatest problem of all is death. Another very important thinker in this context is Georges Bataille, and particularly his idea on sacrifice. In his book, The Curatorial, Bataille writes about the extreme generosity of the sun, which bestows on us surplus energy that needs to be extravagantly spent, wasted through violence, killing, and sacrifice, for life to maintain itself. Bataille's sacrificial cosmology is reminiscent of Marquis de Sade's call for complete destruction of natural world, in order that one could begin again. These calls for destruction of the world resonate with Malevich's suggestion to burn all museums and collect the ashes of art so that it could regenerate itself anew. It is also reminiscent of ideas explored by the Marxist philosopher Evelet Ilinkov in his Cosmology of the Spirit, which calls for the destruction of the cosmos, a self-sacrifice to repay our debt to nature so that it could return to its youth through an artificial Big Bang. Nietzsche's eternal return also comes to mind. It is through the act of sacrifice that the sacred is produced, while mystical experience always entails a certain dissolution of the subject, also a death in a sense. Something similar appears to happen with trance and spiritism sessions, where the body of the medium must be vacated of their individual persona to let something else enter. This is also true of many shamanic traditions, including the Kut ritual in Korea, where the mudang has to be possessed by the spirits. During the 1930s, Georges Bataille attended Alexander Kadjeyev's seminars on Hegel, through whom he encountered unusual ideas and concepts of cosmism, a speculative and futuristic philosophy of technological immortality and material resurrection for all living organisms, and eternal life in the cosmos. These ideas were first developed by Fedorov in Moscow during 1870s. Fedorov was a deeply religious person, and while the core of his thinking is certainly inspired by the main promise of Christianity, a promise of eternal life, he takes a rather heretical approach by insisting that humanity should itself become the source of immortality and resurrection by all possible means, using science, technology, social organization, and art. The end of death is central idea for Fedorov, who also writes that the true work of art is a resurrection, a return to life. Therefore, museums should become factories of resurrection. Libraries should become laboratories for resuscitation of writers. Paradoxically, the other pillar of cosmism, the mathematician Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, believed that death is the most joyous moment in the life of an organism, because the atoms that comprise its body are liberated from being confined to a set form and happily drift into the cosmos. Spiritualistic and psychoanalytic sessions, as well as cinema screenings, are often referred to as a séance in many languages, a French term that has come to indicate a meeting at which people attempt to contact the dead or otherworldly beings through the agency of a gifted medium. The term séance was already in use to refer to Franz Mesmer's therapeutic session of animal magnetism in the 18th century. Flourishing concurrently with the advent of modernism, spiritualism, along with the occult, mysticism, and many new syncretic religions, animated both the popular imagination as well as the imagination of the artistic avant-garde in painting, theater, cinema, literature, and beyond. In part, this fascination with the occult and mysticism was a reaction to the radical disruption that rapid industrialization and modernization produced in society. Everyday life was being reshaped along extremely mechanistic, regimented, and rationalistic lines, amounting to a tremendous degree of stress and alienation that required an emotional and imaginative exit. We can see evidence of this in the works of numerous artists from the early modernist period, from the theosophism of Piet Mondrian to the anthroposophism of Hilma af Klint, who was a member of a group of 5 women in Sweden who used seances to communicate with the spirits of deceased Mahatmas to recover lost wisdom. She claimed that her series of the paintings for the temple were painted directly through her, by the spirits, without any preliminary drawing and with great force. Spiritualism is an American social and religious movement that originated in New York State in the middle of the 19th century. Spiritualism exploded into a vast movement that reached its peak at the turn of the 19th century. Spiritualists consider the date of March 31st, 1848 as the start of their movement. On that day, 2 young sisters, Kate and Margaret Fox, reported that they made a contact with a spirit. Amy and Isaac Post, a Quaker family in Rochester, New York, took the mediums, the 2 girls, into their home, where the contacts with the spirits continued. The Post family were abolitionists and advocates of rights of women. Their house was a shelter for escaping slaves in the Underground Railroad network. They introduced the mediums to their circle of radical Quakers and became early converts themselves. In this way, from the very beginning, spiritualism was intertwined with an emancipation movement that aimed to radically transform society. It's important to underline that the vast majority of mediums who claimed to have communicated with the dead were women. There is a very rich history of images and sculptural objects being ascribed magical, sacred, and mystical qualities. From cave paintings to Scythian stone totems, icons, and sacraments, these objects and representations aim to channel other than human voices and forces. While it's less common to read such qualities in abstract and modern art, a close reading of artists' writing quickly reveal the depth of fascination with the spiritual realm and the desire to harmonize and heal the world through means that draw on practices beyond empirical rationalism. The world sounds. It is a cosmos of spiritually active beings. Even dead matter is living spirit, writes Vasily Kandinsky in 1912. His influential theory of early abstraction, called On the Spiritual in Art, refers directly to a belief in thought forms, immaterial objects produced by thoughts and feelings, as articulated by Annie Besant, a medium and a disciple of Helena Blavatsky, who was one of the most influential and popular mystics of the 19th century and the founder of Theosophy. Thought forms are related to a Buddhist concept of mental clusters. Here is how Besant describes them. Every thought of man, upon being evolved, passes into the inner world and becomes an active entity by associating itself, coalescing, we might term it, with an elemental, that is to say, with one of the semi-intelligent forces of the kingdoms. It survives as an active intelligence, a creature of mind's begetting, for a longer or shorter period proportionate with the original intensity of the cerebral action which generated it. Thus, a good thought is perpetuated as an active, beneficent power, an evil one as a maleficent demon. And so, man is continuously peopling the current in space with a world of his own, crowded with offspring of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions, a current which reacts upon any sensitive or nervous organization which comes in contact with it, in proportion to its dynamic intensity. The Buddhist calls it his skandra. The Hindu gives it the name karma. The adept evolves the shapes consciously. Other men throw them off unconsciously. Besant theorized and developed this concept in an eponymous book that she co-authored with C.W. Leadbeater, and which was beautifully illustrated by John Varley, Eugenie McFarlane, and a certain Mr. Prince. Helena Blavatsky was born in the same town as my mother, albeit 100 years earlier, in 1831. The town is called Dnipro, and it is in eastern Ukraine, on the banks of the Dnipro River. I spent a lot of time there as a child in the 1970s and don't recall anything particularly mystical about it. By the early 1870s, Blavatsky was involved in spiritualism. Departing from traditional spiritualists, Blavatsky synthesized Western and Eastern mysticism in her writings. In 1875, she co-founded the Theosophical Society in New York City, where I live now. The writer and theorist Boris Groys pointed out to me on several occasions the unique significance of Blavatsky's work that is often overlooked. Whatever one thinks of her methods, the impact of her ideas and persona made on cultural figures and artists worldwide is simply astonishing. Furthermore, she was one of the first thinkers to combine Western spiritual teachings with Eastern mystical traditions, inaugurating and popularizing what has become the dominant tendency in alternative spirituality from the late 19th century to present day. Annie Besant's range of activities is simply overwhelming and entirely too vast to summarize here. In short, following the death of Blavatsky in 1891, Besant became one of the leaders of the Theosophical Society, becoming its president in 1908. In addition to her role in the Theosophical movement, Besant was a feminist activist, a member of early socialist and Marxist group, a decolonial activist who became a high-ranking member of the Indian National Congress, influential on Gandhi and Nehru, an important Freemason, a medium, and more. In 1904, Besant appointed Rudolf Steiner to lead the Esoteric School for Germany and Austria. A member of Theosophical Society for several years, Steiner eventually insisted on a more Eurocentric focus, making a particular emphasis on Christianity, to which Blavatsky and Besant were totally opposed. This led to Steiner's split from Theosophy in 1912 and a formation of his own group, the Anthroposophical Society, with a center in Dornach, Switzerland. Interestingly, the split started over a disagreement in interpretation of artistic expression. The impact of Theosophy and Anthroposophy on art reflects a certain synthesis of Eastern and Western religious thought, from Buddhism and Christianity to shamanism, Shia and Sufi Islam, and more. It is not surprising that throughout the post-World War II period, numerous artists continued to draw inspiration from old and new spiritual disciplines in Asia, from Zen to a new syncretic religion called Oomoto. Oomoto was developed in Japan at the close of 19th century by an impoverished housewife, Deguchi Nao, who lived in the village of Ayabe in Kyoto Prefecture. Deguchi Nao was known to be completely illiterate, yet she was able to notate the messages in automatic writing, which were subsequently interpreted by Deguchi Onisaburo, a mystic who married one of Deguchi Nao's daughters and adopted their family name. What is completely fascinating for me about Oomoto religion is its emphasis on art. A matrilineal organization where each chief priestess comes from the Deguchi family and is required to be an artist, a calligrapher, a ceramicist, an actress trained in traditional theater and dance, or a Ikebana artist. Despite having millions of followers at its peak in the 1920s, Oomoto was banned and its leaders jailed throughout World War II, and many were tortured. It is also a universalist, anti-nationalist religion. As early as 1924, they decided to abandon the Japanese language and adopted Esperanto. In the late 1970s through 1990s, Oomoto operated a summer art school with many international participants and collaborators, including Buckminster Fuller. Automatic writing, hypnosis, and seance techniques were also deployed by numerous artists of the Surrealist movement, which André Breton defined as a psychic automatism in its pure state, by which one proposes to express the actual functioning of thought. Importantly, this interest in the occult and mysticism among the Surrealists is linked to a commitment to a progressive emancipation of society. For example, the journal Asifal, which was organized by Georges Bataille as an offshoot of the Sociological Congress in Paris in the 1930s, which was a gathering of leftist intellectuals with an aim to oppose rising fascism, was styled on an occult society. It took as its symbol a body without a head to indicate a desire to do away with rationality and the ego and to return to a more animistic state. Apparently, Bataille felt that to inaugurate the publication properly, a human sacrifice was required. But not wanting to impose violence or kill someone against their will, he asked for volunteers. Nobody volunteered to be sacrificed. The shamanistic qualities of artistic practice find remarkable materialization in works of such artists as Emma Kunz, Joseph Beuys, who both utilized art as means of harmonizing and healing our world. In other manifestation of this tradition, Namjoon Paik invokes shamanism in his groundbreaking work with contemporary media and technology, while Onisaburo Deguchi, during the closed days of World War II, produced hundreds of brightly painted ceramic vessels, following Omoto belief that art is a form of transcendent divinity within our human realm. It is said that the bright acidic colors of his ceramics were inspired by the coloration of the sky caused by the nuclear explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which apparently was visible all the way from the mountains around Kyoto. Now we're again undergoing a period of extremely abrupt and rapid transformation of means of production and communication on a planetary scale because of digitalization, algorithmic automation, and the deployment of artificial intelligence. Once again, the change is causing disorientation, anxiety, alienation, and stress among numerous communities. Populism, nationalism, and fascism are on the rise again. It is not accidental, then, that contemporary practices of very many artists, filmmakers, and other cultural practitioners again find inspiration in the epistemology and aesthetics of realms beyond the human as a mean of making sense of our present predicament. The aim of our edition of the Biennale is to produce an exhibition as a séance, a project that not only presents historical and contemporary artistic practices and discourses that draw on occult, mystical, and spiritual traditions, but one that enters in a conversation with multiple realms that exist within and beyond the human world, and hopefully, through art, gives space to voices of the dead and other than human and their emancipatory potential. Thank you very much. So next we're going to show three short films. The first one is by Kenneth Anger. It's only 42 seconds and it's called Death. The second film is by Yinju Chan, an artist from Taipei. It's a 16-minute film that was made as maybe a reaction or response to the death of the artist's mother. And the third film is something I made a couple of years ago with my colleague Pelin Tan, who is a sociologist and art historian based in Turkey. It's based on the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it was shot in the southeastern region, Kurdish region of Turkey on the border with Syria. And it's 42 minutes long. I hope you enjoy the screening. Thank you very much again.